What would your younger self say about how your family turned out?
They took their holiday photo without me again, and this time there was not even the polite, after-the-fact text that pretends I was accidentally missed. There was only the post calling it the whole gang. And reading those words felt like watching an exit memo from a team I helped build, because it did not read like a mistake or a lost invite. It read like a clean decision wrapped as tradition. And the sting that followed was the old one I have learned to breathe through even while it keeps burning. I can live with chaotic calendars and imperfect communication because adults are busy and scattered, but this is not that. This is a pattern that began when I was a teenager and got labeled the strong personality, which in our house meant please stop making us uncomfortable, and over the years the small exclusions that could be dismissed as scheduling hardened into a script where I am the driver, the helper, the photographer, the steady hand who props up the moment while being told not to take up the moment. Mom says I read into things, Dad says it is not that deep, Grandma Evelyn sighs about seasons the way people talk about weather, my brother Kyle cracks a joke to keep the room light, and my sister Jenna asks in that careful voice why I did not show up even though the invite never existed, and I could send the usual balanced message that blends grace and clarity and lets everyone feel decent. But doing that only hands them another soothing story about miscommunication while absolutely nothing changes for me. What changed this year is not that I turned cold or decided I was above them. It is that a few days ago I received an email I did not share because I am done auditioning for my own relatives. A clear confirmation that I am on the new Forbes 30 under 30 list, which I know can land strangely. But when you build something brick by brick, while the people who should be your loudest supporters keep patting you on the head, outside validation gives you permission to stop begging for basic recognition at home. So I sat with the caption "the whole gang" and, instead of crying or calling or drafting a speech in my notes, I asked myself a sharper question than I have ever allowed: if they prefer a version of this family where I do not exist. What happens when I place a version of me into their daily line of sight that they cannot crop or mute or reframe as a mix-up? And the answer arrived clean and a little funny in a way that finally let me breathe. There is a billboard directly across from Grandma Evelyn's house that cycles through dentists and church events and local races, and everyone in my family passes it whether they mean to or not. So I opened my laptop, found the leasing company, and filled out the inquiry with my legal name and my business email, asking for a standard run starting the week after the holiday with a headshot and the line Forbes 30 under 30, my name spelled correctly and my company beneath it, nothing more and nothing less. The rep replied with a request for a deposit and a signature to hold the rotation, and the earlier version of me might have paused to wonder whether this would be petty or whether it would make peace harder later. But the version of me who is done being small moved the money, signed the agreement, and selected the exact week they always gather for the family dinner after the holiday, because if we are telling stories about who belongs, the headline should finally match the facts they keep editing. By the time I submitted the artwork request, my phone was buzzing with comments under the whole gang from neighbors and church friends who meant well. And I decided I would not argue with pictures that pretend I am not real nor offer another chance for a conversation they do not intend to have. So I set a reminder to approve the proof and put my phone face down, and if you want to call it petty or showy, call it that, because the deposit is paid, the dates are locked, the slot faces Grandma's window, and I will not answer a single call until I hear the first ring from Grandma's landline, which is when I will know they finally saw me. If you have ever been told since you were young that you are a lot, not in the fun way but in the way that makes adults glance at each other over your head and file you under the category of needs managing, then you already understand the particular quiet that follows when a family decides your achievements are noisy and your needs are inconvenient, because the quiet is not peaceful or accidental, it is curated. And it grows teeth around ordinary moments like school plays and Sunday dinners and graduation cards, and those yearly pictures where everyone squeezes together and calls it tradition while someone makes sure you end up at the edge of the frame or behind a taller cousin so the caption can stay cheerful without your face pushing up against the claim that everything here is equal and warm. I got the earliest version of that treatment when I was still in middle school and asked questions that made PTA volunteers uncomfortable, then again in high school when my counselor suggested scholarships, and my parents looked past me to talk about my brother's travel team schedule because that was easier to cheer for. And by the time I was in college and paying my own rent on a mattress that creaked every time the upstairs neighbor walked, the family story about me had settled into one of those lines that sounds reasonable if you have never met me. The one that says she is independent, she does her own thing, she is better on her own, which really means we do not have to make room. What made this year hit differently is not only the post calling that crowded the whole gang as if I were a forgotten extra on a set that had already wrapped, but the way the group chat stayed quiet in that particular tone I know by heart. The tone that says we saw it, and we are going to write it out because acknowledging the gap would require admitting the gap has a shape, and that shape looks exactly like me, which is a level of honesty no one in our house ever volunteers, not during holiday prayers, not during birthday toasts, not during the polite after call where someone says they missed me and immediately shifts to an update about an appliance warranty or a neighbor's property line, or the church fundraiser that will need volunteers. I used to accept that rhythm because there is a version of love in there, and I am not made of stone. But last year I learned to watch where my energy goes, and once you start measuring how many hours you spend rescuing plans other people made badly, you also notice that your name shows up when something needs fixing and goes missing when something needs celebrating, which is not drama, it is simply a ledger finally being read out loud. So I opened my laptop and pulled up the shared family photo archive, the one I created years ago when Jenna's first baby arrived and everyone kept losing pictures inside endless text threads. And I scrolled through the thousands of images I had imported and tagged and dated, while people said things like "you are so organized" and "we would be lost without you." And I looked at the permissions page and counted how many relatives had full access to comment and download and request edits, because I had given it to them without thinking twice. And then I pictured the caption "the whole gang," and I realized that being the unpaid archivist of a family that edits me out is just another version of carrying the heavy box and being told not to stand in front of the camera, which is not noble. It is ridiculous. I wrote a calm message that said, "Please download anything you care about by tomorrow evening, because I am migrating my originals to a private drive and the shared album will switch to view only." And before anyone could perform confusion or disappointment, I set the change for the next day, not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because I wanted the pattern to stop latching onto my time like it was owed. And on a separate tab, I opened a folder labeled press that I had never mentioned in the chat, a folder that holds confirmations and drafts and notes from a year I built without family cheerleading. And I sat there with the weight of those messages and the empty group chat and the knowledge that I have something sitting in my inbox that would rewrite the way they talk about me in one sentence. When I closed the laptop, I felt that rare mix of grief and relief that comes when you stop running laps around people who insist the track is your idea, and I promised myself I would not tip them off or ask for recognition or try to teach a lesson. I would simply redirect the spotlight they keep pretending does not exist until the day it lands where they cannot ignore it, and I will decide, not them, when that day is, which is why I set one more reminder on my phone with a name only I would understand, and then, because a boundary means nothing without action. I canceled the standing bakery order I have quietly prepaid every year for the post-holiday dessert table and forwarded the confirmation to the group with one line that said "you will need a new card on file." And I watched the typing bubbles flicker like a fire no one knows how to put out while I opened an unread email, whose subject line could move mountains if I chose to let it, and I smiled without hitting reply because the next move is mine. There is a kind of silence you learn to hold when something good happens, and the people who should be the first call would turn it into a debate about tone or timing or humility. And that is the silence I kept the morning the Forbes editor wrote to say the list was final and the profile was scheduled, because even though a part of me has always wanted to run into that kitchen and wave the email like a report card stuck to the fridge, the larger part has finally learned that handing my good news to people who train me to expect a shrug is the fastest way to make a bright thing feel small. So I let the message sit. I sent the headshot the editor asked for. I checked the spelling of my name 3 times. And I answered the fact checker with the same steady detail I have used for clients for years, while the group chat kept trading casserole recipes and updates about a neighbor's fence, like the caption the whole gang had not already written me out of the story they planned to tell at church on Sunday. What surprised me was not the thrill of the recognition, because I know what it took and I know the numbers behind it, and I do not need a magazine to tell me my work is real. What surprised me was the calm that moved in right after the confirmation. A clean feeling that said I do not have to argue my place in a room that goes quiet when I speak. I can just move the conversation to a space where my name is not treated like a favor to be granted, and that is when the billboard shifted in my mind. From a spicy idea to a practical instrument, not a tantrum, not a stunt, just a way to make the truth visible to the exact people who keep pretending they lost it between the appetizer and the prayer. I had already put down the deposit because I knew hesitation would invite a dozen tiny compromises dressed as reasonableness, so the next step was choosing the line that would do the job with no sugar and no apology. And when the designer asked if I wanted a longer caption about entrepreneurship or community work or any of the harmless phrasing people use when they are scared of being called proud, I said no, use my name, use the exact words from the list, keep it simple and impossible to reinterpret, and put my company underneath in a font no one can claim they misread, because if we are going to be accused of showing off either way, I would rather be accused of being clear. While the artwork moved through their approval queue, I built my own little firewall against the instinct to soften, which for me looks like telling one trusted friend the plan and swearing her to silence. Then opening my calendar and aligning the run with the week after the holiday, because that is when the family dinner always happens, and if the whole gang wants to perform unity on that street, they can do it under a sky that does not need their permission to acknowledge me and before you. Ask, yes, I thought about Grandma, I thought about whether she would feel ambushed or embarrassed, and I decided that for once I am allowed to choose an action that centers me without asking the same committee that has never once centered me for permission. Because Grandma is also the one who has stood in that front room while I rang the bell with a pie and said we already have dessert, and I am allowed to set down that plate and speak at scale. The petty voice in my head wanted fireworks and a countdown. But the adult part of me with a spine and an accountant knows subtlety works better when you are teaching people who think they never get taught, so I requested a standard rotation. I confirmed the location code that maps to the exact panel across from her block, and I scheduled the launch for the afternoon when everyone will be driving in, not because I need the shock, but because I want clarity. A bright line between the years I swallowed the slight and the year I said I hear you. Now hear me. The last wobble arrived when the editor offered to send me the link early and asked if I planned a celebration, and I almost answered with the joke I always make about being too busy. But I caught myself and said I will be celebrating on my terms and left it at that, then turned off my read receipts in the family thread so I would not be tempted to stage a reaction or preempt an argument. And I redirected the nervous energy into a list of practical things that always keep me steady, like verifying the run times, confirming the payment cleared, and saving the proof in a private folder I labeled Quiet Thunder because naming it made me laugh in a way that did not hurt, and when the final mock-up arrived it was exactly what I asked for. Clean and sharp and impossible to debate, so I typed one sentence to the rep that said approved as is, please schedule, and as soon as I hit send my phone lit up with a call from a blocked number that I ignored on reflex, then it rang again from Grandma's landline, which means someone already drove past the install crew, and I let it ring until the voicemail clicked because the next sound I want to hear is not an excuse or a lecture about humility, it is the silence after they finally say my name without flinching. The morning the billboard went up I told myself I would not drive by to check, because part of me still carries that cautious voice that says if you look too soon you might jinx it. But by noon the suspense was eating at me in a way that felt childish and giddy and a little reckless, so I turned onto the street where Grandma's house sits at the end like it has since before I was born. And the second my eyes caught the giant frame above the traffic lights, I realized there was no going back. Because there it was, my face, my name, my company, the exact line from Forbes, and not a single word anyone in my family could crop or cover or explain away. Looming directly across from the front porch where I had been told year after year that my timing was off, or my tone was too sharp, or my presence was unnecessary. I sat in the car for a full minute, watching people glance up while waiting for the light to change, strangers who did not know me pointing and reading out loud, kids asking their parents who that was. And the weight of that small chorus felt like a kind of justice I had never experienced before, because I did not need to beg anyone at that house to admit I existed. The proof was taller than the roof and brighter than the excuses, and it belonged to me. I almost laughed at the thought that for years I had accepted the story that I was too much, because clearly I had not been nearly enough for them to see, and now the size of the image made it impossible to pretend otherwise. The fallout began faster than I expected, with the first ding of the group chat before I had even left the intersection, Jenna typing a frantic string of question marks followed by Kyle's predictable joke about whether I had finally joined a cult, which would have been funny if I had not grown up watching him get praised for humor while I got scolded for attitude. Within minutes, the thread filled with every flavor of reaction you could imagine. Mom asking why I would blindside them like this. Dad saying it was not the right way to handle things. Cousins sending screenshots with exaggerated exclamation marks, as if they were shocked to learn what I had been building for years, and Grandma's number flashing across my screen in the middle of it all. A call I let ring out because I wanted the silence to say more than I could in words. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the voicemail box was already stacked, each one starting with the strained version of my name that family members only use when they want to guilt me into softening. And I let them pile up because for once I wanted them to sit with the discomfort I have lived in for years, the ache of being ignored while everyone else got the spotlight. I made myself a coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and scrolled through the endless missed calls, not to torture myself, but to taste the rare flavor of knowing I held the power this time, that I was not chasing them, that they were chasing me. And every vibration of the phone was proof that the narrative had shifted without me needing to speak a single word. When the local paper ran a short feature about the list later that afternoon and included a photo of the billboard, it spread even faster, neighbors tagging family members, church friends forwarding the link. People outside the family acting more excited for me than the ones whose approval I had wasted years chasing, and that contrast landed heavier than I expected. It was not just about recognition, it was about realizing I had surrounded myself with people who would never celebrate me because my success made them uncomfortable, and I had finally forced them to look, not at a holiday card or a cropped frame, but at the truth they had been dodging. I let the calls keep coming into the evening, letting the battery drain while the group chat spiraled from outrage to damage control to forced cheerleading, all of them scrambling to rewrite the story now that denial was no longer an option. And I smiled at the thought that they had once believed they could erase me with a caption, while now the whole town was driving past my face on a sign no one could miss. And as I set my phone face down on the counter, I knew the next step was not about answering them. It was about deciding how much space they would be allowed to take in a life that no longer required their permission, and that decision would come on my time, not theirs. By the time the first full day passed after the billboard went up, my voicemail box was overflowing. My text notifications were stacked so high I had to scroll for minutes to see the beginning. And even my work email had been hijacked by relatives forwarding the photo as if I did not already know what it looked like, each one attaching a new version of the same question. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you do it like this? What were you trying to prove? As if the answer were not staring at them. From 30 feet above Grandma's street in clean block letters that needed no translation. It was strange, sitting at my desk with my laptop open, knowing that for once the silence was mine to choose, because I was no longer locked in the endless loop of drafting careful responses, softening my tone, or sending explanations designed to protect their feelings while mine were dismissed, and instead I could simply watch the calls come in, decline them, and sip my coffee without the familiar ache of guilt pressing down on my chest. What surprised me was how quickly the tone shifted once they realized I was not going to answer immediately, because the early messages were full of outrage and disbelief, Mom accusing me of humiliating the family, Dad insisting that grown-up success does not excuse childish behavior, Cole trying to make it a joke that I should have at least included a discount code for my company, and Jenna writing a long paragraph about how she never meant to hurt me, how I was overreacting, and how the billboard was unnecessary. But when hours passed with nothing from me, the pitch changed from scolding to pleading, and by evening the same voices that had called me dramatic for years were begging me to pick up, saying things like, "We're proud of you, we just didn't know how to show it." Or you could have told us privately, or Grandma is upset and wants to talk to you. Each message layered on top of the last until the entire family narrative began to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. Because if they had always been proud, then why had I been erased year after year? And if they truly cared, why had it taken a billboard to make them dial my number in unison? I did not rush to answer, not because I wanted to punish them, but because I realized that for once I held the leverage they had always claimed belonged to them. And the feeling of not being the one chasing their attention was more freeing than anything I could have scripted. Sitting in that quiet space, I thought about the years I had spent baking pies and carrying boxes into Grandma's kitchen, the times I had volunteered to do the family slideshow, the late nights I stayed up editing photos so everyone looked their best, only to have my own presence treated like a technicality, and I realized that what hurt most was not the exclusion itself, but the way it had been packaged as normal, as if being sidelined was simply my role to accept. Now the roles had reversed, and they were the ones pacing their kitchens, drafting explanations, scrambling to fix the story, while I was the one with the power to answer or not. The hardest moment came when I saw Grandma's name again and again on my screen, because she is old and frail, and I know she has lived long enough to believe that appearances are the truth. And part of me wanted to pick up and reassure her that I had not done this to be cruel, that I was only tired of being invisible. But another part of me, the part that remembers standing at her door with a pie in my hands while she looked over my shoulder and asked if Jenna was coming too, knew that answering right away would only reset the old cycle, the one where I made everyone comfortable again at my expense. So I let it ring, telling myself that silence was not cruelty this time, it was clarity, and that maybe clarity was the only real gift I could give them after years of cushioning every blow. When the weekend came, the group chat lit up with photos of relatives gathered at Grandma's house, every shot framed carefully so the billboard was just out of sight, and the irony made me laugh harder than I had in months. Because they were still trying to crop me out even when I was unmissable, and that desperation was proof that the sign had done exactly what I wanted, forcing them to face the fact that ignoring me was no longer an option. And while they smiled for the camera, pretending nothing had changed, I sat at home with friends who had been cheering for me long before any magazine called. And I realized that I no longer needed the performance of family unity when I had already built one that was real. So when people ask if I ever answered, the truth is that I have not yet, and maybe I never will, because the victory is not in hearing their explanations. The victory is in knowing that for once they are the ones waiting for me. The ones rehearsing apologies, the ones wondering how it feels to be left out, and while I may choose to forgive someday, I will not hand that choice over casually. For now, the phone can keep buzzing, the chat can keep filling, the stories can keep spinning, because the billboard is still standing, the town is still looking, and my family, for the first time in my life, has to look too, whether they like it or not. And maybe that is all the closure I will ever need.